to Maxed Out Man, helping you become the man you were made to be.
Hey guys, it's Kevin Davis from the Maxed Out Man podcast. This is episode number 34. I'm here with RT Phillips. RT is the co-founder of CORE, which is an organization that exists to serve and equip those who are passionate about seeing men embrace their true identity and purpose, which is pretty much what we try to do as well, through strategic partnerships, and they develop tools and resources for leaders to deepen their impact on culture. So he's also a men's ministry. You run a men's ministry as well, or men's pastor, I guess is what you would say. But hey, thanks for taking the time. It's what you're doing is super important, and I think that I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. If you want, give me kind of more of the backstory. That's just kind of like the LinkedIn headline of what you do, but I'd love to hear more about what you do as a pastor and kind of what CORE is.
Well, first and foremost, thank you, Kevin. It's an honor to be on here with you and have this conversation. So thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I've been in the faith-based lane for much of my adult life. I didn't grow up that way. I was drafted in the military. I had a significant shift in my life there when I was in the Army at the time, and came to know and Jesus in a way that I was actually going through a lot of really dark stuff at that time. Went to Hawaii instead of being shipped to Vietnam. That's where I met my wife, Holly, and we will celebrate our 50th anniversary here in a few months.
That's awesome.
And went to college in California. I was raised in Southern California. So I'm here in Texas. I love Texas, love Texans, and I keep that quiet, right? So
yeah, we'll edit that out. You're actually from Wyoming, right? Like that's the
hopefully nobody from Texas will hear this part. But anyway, went to college in California. And it was a Bible college. And when there, I learned I had a knack for bringing together people. I had gone through a radical life change, and I loved what Jesus had done for me as a man. And I just had a desire to want to help others come to that same connection. So creating environments where that was on a kind of large, quote unquote, large scale, I did while I was in college, and I went back to Hawaii and started a couple churches. We did some large things. We did some things that were pretty, significant as far as those kind of environments where we have thousands of people come together, and also I was kind of in my blood. I went to Colorado. Holly and I we spent over 30 years in Denver, Colorado, and that's really where we raised our family. And there, a football coach, University of Colorado football coach by the name of Bill McCartney, had this idea of bringing together a stadium full of men. His pastor and I were good buddies, and so he had Bill and I get together and said, hey, this is somebody that maybe could help this idea. So I did, and that thing just exploded. And so our first gathering in July of 91, we had 4,200 guys come together. And then Bill asked if I would head up the organization. He was coaching at that time. It was they'd won the national championship. It was a very demanding job, but Bill's passion was definitely for men. He saw a lot of the deterioration taking place within the young men that he was working with around the country, and wanted to, out of his faith, wanted to do something about it and create an environment where his whole thing was a man's a godly man. So I got involved, and that thing just exploded. It was really, we've never seen anything like that in our country. We were, in the 5 years that I was president, we had almost 5 million guys come together in stadiums around the country. And so Kevin, we would fill a stadium before the marketing materials got to the city in some places. And so Wow. It was ridiculous. And then, so I did that. And then it gets into a deeper part of my story. Maybe we'll get into that in our conversations around masculinity. But there came a time where I was strongly being urged, a sense from God to a deeper level of surrender and openness to Him. More and more subconsciously, like a lot of us guys, I think just about every guy I know, we can be drawn into that our validation as a man comes out of what we do. And just because you're in the faith-based area, because I had a genuine love for Jesus and all, but deep down in my own brokenness, I was being validated by the things I did versus who I was. So that statement there is pretty much everything for me. So, and worth probably circle back on that conversation, but because I didn't get it, because I missed it, because of deep down that blindness in me, that I knew that God was everything. I knew that He was the one that gave me life and purpose. I absolutely knew that. But underneath that, Kevin, was a need for Him to help me be important. And it's a subtle thing, but unchecked, that thing in there can become self-consuming. And God was trying to get me to face that in a way that was very, very difficult for me. I couldn't fix myself, and it went through a slow death experience over a period of about 20 years, where eventually I lost everything. So we lost our savings, lost our home, lost self-respect. It was just a very, very difficult but amazingly wonderful time where I finally gave up doing everything that had worked for me all my life to do important things. My daydream as a young pastor was to fill a stadium full of men. So before that ever happened, so my dream, all of us have dreams, right? My dream was that. Well, I got to do that in ways that nobody's ever experienced. At one point, I had the only time in my life, Kevin, I had a vision. It's a different story, but I had a picture of 1 million men in Washington, D.C. Well, that happened in October of 1997. This picture that 3 years before that God had given me actually happened. I say that not how important I am, but that guy, that broken former drug hippie guy that came to life in Jesus, and all of a sudden gets to experience the beauty and seeing lives changed. And I was quote unquote living my dream, but deep down, slowly, that was the very things that were the things that validated me were becoming my idol, and God wanting to free me. And so I hit bottom. I came here to Austin, where I love. We talked a little bit here before I jumped on. That Texans are the best, and I'm saying that I'm living in California, Hawaii, and Colorado, but Texans are awesome. But I hit bottom here. I just took a job, and God did this burning bush experience for me that got down into an area in my life that I realized that it wasn't about my performance, but it was about what He believed about me, and it just shifted everything. And out of that came what you just said, core. So what I do, I work with my son, and we seek to develop and help men not take 20 years to try to fix themselves, but learn what it means in our identity to be shifted around who I already am, and out of that gratefulness live. And so, so a quick little background of an old guy.
Old guy, yeah. I mean, congratulations, first of all, on 50 years. We just celebrated 28. It's funny how everybody's story can kind of intertwine a little bit. My daughter-in-law actually is in the Army and was stationed on Oahu. So a little bit, and were you Army?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So I mean, you basically were at the same base. So that's kind of interesting. But the organization you're talking about is Promise Keepers, and being someone that grew up in that era, and it was a young man with a family and all that. I actually have been to, I think, 2 or 3 of those events that I went to. And if you're not familiar with what Promise Keepers looks like, and especially if you're not a Christian, you may think, oh, is this just a bunch of men standing around, holding hands, singing Kumbaya together, or what? Could you? I want to talk more about core and your story, but I'm just interested in framing that for people, because this really is, Promise Keepers was one of those things that it was primarily geared towards Christian men, but the idea was to bring men together to explore a different side of themselves, and to kind of explore their real purpose. And it was never been done before. Like, it was kind of the first part of the beginning of this, what you could call men's masculinity movement and what that really meant, and redefining it. So could you walk us through real quick what a Promise Keepers event might look like, just so people can put some things into context?
Yeah. Well, I mentioned that the visionary behind it that felt, that used, his position as, at that time, he was coach of the year. He took a program that was really in many ways never successful, and he built that up to one of the top programs. It would be at that time it'd be the Alabama or Georgia or whatever of that time. And so that was an amazing thing in and of itself. But Bill was somebody that really, he wasn't a football coach who was a Christian. He loved Jesus, and happened to be a very, very successful football coach. That's genuinely who Bill was. And he saw what was taking place as he was with some of the great athletes around the country in their living rooms. He saw in the 20 years by then coaching that he'd done, the deterioration that was taking place, of the absence of men, the father, the influence, and the consequences of much of that, and then facing a lot of these great kids with great potential would be in self-destruct mode, because of a lack of what was built within them, and getting the notoriety of a college program in Boulder, Colorado. So he saw that, he felt that, and he just felt like there's something needed to be done. And so out of that came a desire to bring together men. And so we filled the goal was to fill a stadium full of men. And we did that. It took us 3 years. So we had 4,200, 22,000, 50,000 in July of 1993. The Promise Keepers, we took a lot of heat. There's a lot of heat back in that day, because Bill, as a football, early on, there was a bill that had to do with something around the gay rights issue, and something was, and so Bill had endorsed that. Well, that forever then created, for Promise Keepers, this feeling like, particularly from the quote unquote national media, that we were against stuff, that we were against women, that we were, against gays, which wasn't the truth, right? It wasn't. We were coming together because we recognized we were broken, and there were issues that we know as men, for the sake of others, that we wanted to make a difference. And so our passion genuinely was to have that kind of environment. But it was incredible, because the speakers, the music, all the things we did was to create an environment where, number one, men, you're not alone. The things that you may feel that you're struggling with, or your hopes and all, that you're not alone, that there's a move going on of guys who really want to come alive, what it means to truly represent the kind of masculinity that's known for what it gives, not what it takes. And so it was combustible, right? So that the gathering of 4,200 became 22,000, because guys experienced in there something very, very incredible, of an embrace of our, I'll use, as a follower of Jesus, we sensed a presence of an affirming God who did love us for where we are, but yet wanted to bring out of us, to take our eyes off the narcissism that all of us were living, and begin to look at and give up our life for others. And so that was, that the combination of those things, of just needing to know that there are other men that were where we were and struggled and yet had the same hopes. And then a sense of God's affirming and meeting us where we are, regardless of how broken we were. It just exploded. And so that 4,200 became 22, became 50, became, I think the next year was 270,000. Next year was 600. Then it became 1.2 million. And this is in stadiums. So it was just something we'd not seen. Well, what was going on? There was a genuineness of taking place within the culture that was seeking to tell what masculinity attack men. And much of some of the attack was justified in the sense that, we were increasingly leaving the home. We were increasingly, the men would use their strength at the expense of women and others. Like there would be protests everywhere we would go. And this is it may sound like this is the truth. I never, and I've had at times literally scream at me, say things at me, say some not so nice things to me. But I genuinely love them as a whole. Many of them faced the pain of what it was like to be in a situation where they were hurt deeply, deeply by someone that was supposed to love them. And they knew they had sisters that experienced the same thing. They thought this idea of all these men streaming into stadiums was going to reinforce a kind of masculinity that was going to result in greater hurt and pain. So I got why they were there. So I'd never judge. I know. So it was never. But I mean, there's great stories won't go into where we actually would invite in, and they would sit in my booth and just had a different experience of actually what did take place. So that's my quick little, what Promise Keepers was about. It was just a powerful season of time.
And I find that super interesting because you're talking early 90s. I mean, this is that would be 30 years ago, and like 32 years ago. And we're in a much different time. We could say we're in a much different time, but the core issues, pun intended with your organization, but the core issues in masculinity in men existed then and before then. And the struggles that men have, I think now, did you see at that time versus now, there was a similar attack, or is it, has it graduated into additional attack on masculinity? I have a thing behind me that says masculinity is not toxic. Some men just suck, which is basically like some, it's so, but I mean, it's like masculinity in and of itself is not a toxic idea. And but it seems like now it's under more attack, but do you think that has actually changed, or you think it's just existed, through multiple generations?
Well, it gets a little deeper dive into, some of my views of life and philosophy of life. But yeah, I think it started from the very beginning of time, that the idea of what we were originally designed for has been lost. Mm-hmm. And so for those of us that, the faith that draw from the original design of who we are, who I am, was we had the freedom to live life out of not needing to think about myself first. It was other focused. And so that picture of, you hear it at every, at least Christian wedding, that, Adam and Eve were there, they were naked and not ashamed. Well, what is that? There was they saw each other out of the beauty of who they are and how to love them versus what my own self. So when you begin to focus everything that starts with, which is what I struggle deeply with, around the need of how is this going to help me, and then and then I'll love you. Well, that was lost. That ability, the freedom to live other-centered, was lost. And what that brought to us was living life out of, first of all, what does it mean to me? And so Kevin, you and I know as we work with guys, you have these extremes. So you have this hyper masculine, survival of the fittest masculinity, right? And so there's some good qualities to that, and all, but you want to make it this, again, that macho masculinity to take control and to drive your life and all, which is at times very needed and wonderful, but that you can also have that passive masculinity that basically goes wherever the prevailing wind sends it. I'm just going to be the nice guy. And so I'm here to be nice and and it's good to be nice. It's wonderful to be nice. And it's good to those elements, but the two extremes that we have within masculinity are both into themselves. It's the same it's the same issue.
Yeah.
The same issue, and that's self-absorption. It's about me, and that we need a kind of masculinity that the starting point isn't about me, but it's about you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the freedom that's beginning on a whole new level for me and living life out of the slow, the scar tissue of my own narcissistic living as a man, as a husband, as a father, as a follower of Jesus. There's a deeper level I'm beginning to experience that brings more the best out of who I am, not because it's about me, but it's about you.
Yeah. And I mean, and those two extremes, the way I usually think about them is you have like special operator, Navy SEAL, soldier going in to do a job, going in to do a mission. Obviously, that's not the time to talk to your buddies about your feelings, right? And really, go down that road. But when you're holding your new baby daughter in the hospital, lying in the bed with your bride, that is a whole different side. There's nothing any less masculine about that than the other, and trying to find that balance between them. I think of what a lot of men do that I've seen is they put on, and myself included, is you kind of wear these masks, right? Like we almost put on that hyper masculinity mask as a way, because at somewhere in our system, we feel that the other side of that continuum shows weakness.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's something you agree with or not, but
100%, Kevin, 100%. Much of what I try to do is I say this all the time. I think the guys that that I have the opportunity to speak in their lives are sick of me saying this all the time. I go, there's a reason why the Bible goes out of its way to reveal the weaknesses, the failings, and the sins of its heroes.
mm-hmm.
It goes out of the way. Well, that points out probably there was another writer than self-consumed writer to reveal how broken all the heroes of the Bible were. Well, it's because it points to that there's a greater sense and opportunity out of what God has done for me, and that what you described was weakness is. I think you got to help a man embrace his strength. You got to first help him embrace weakness.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, when I described that 20 years of a slow free fall, it was I was so tenaciously not willing to face the own depth of my own weakness that was keeping me from understanding the beauty and the depth of who I am. That mask you described wasn't a purposeful, I'm going to wear a mask. It's all I knew. I just tried to, for a lot of our guys that you and I are working with and trying to help, it's the best that we know. The best that we know is to try, and so to try to be heroic or to try to be serving, or, it's doing it out of something that's not out of who we are, but it's out of a need to perform. Even in that, even over a long period of time, is self-destructive. And so it really needs to come out of a deeper understanding of embracing weakness so that we can tap into strength, and that strength will help us then overcome that weakness.
And what does that exploration process look like in terms of, because like I said, as far as masks go, like we have this, I feel like a lot of men, we're doing some marriage ministry, mentoring with a couple now. And we had this conversation last night. He was talking about changing from basically a self-employed person to someone that is actually going back and being employed. And he was struggling. One of the big struggle is this pride, not prideful in like a boastful way, but we all have pride, but in a way that he was worried about losing his identity by not being the go-to guy in his own business. So what is that kind of, in exposing our weaknesses, what does that process look like? And I mean, I know you went through it for 20 years. So, I mean, take as long a time as you want, but what kind of process are you taking men through in order to get to that process?
Well, I think, to know, as we talked a little bit about a minute ago, the original design, the way you know the worth of something is what was it made for,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if someone's out there on a golf course and you see him trying to smack a golf ball with his cell phone, there's something wrong, right? That's
Yeah.
not what it was made for. And so the worth of something is what's the original purpose? We'd like to think we're independent, we're captain of our own souls, and we can do whatever we want to do. I think eventually we all figure out something in that's just not working.
Mm-hmm.
So the original design of who we are is a man was created to be incredibly courageous, to give up himself for others. And but what does that look like at times where you talked about the different ways in which that guy wants to feel like his worth is needing to be the guy, right? That he's
Mm-hmm.
going to come up with the answer. Well, that's important, right? He is feeling that there is a demand, and it's a tough world to try to provide for and make things work with others around you. Would love to see you fail so they could succeed. So there is that demands on us to make decisions that are hard ones. But when it becomes our identity, it becomes around that is who I am versus that is something at times I need to make a difference, but I'm not going to give up the values that people are more important, that how I live my life out of the character of who I am
Mm-hmm.
is not sacrificed at the need of justifying the ends by the means. And so, was Jesus a more of a man when he took the whip and he kicked out all these people that were in the temple, using the temple as a means for their own selfish gain and ripping off the poor people and others to buy their things at exorbitant costs, so that they could live they used God to their own selfish means. So he took a whip and enough of this crap, right? This is not what this place was made for. And
Mm-hmm.
so was he more of a man when he took a whip, and threw over the tables and kicked him out? Or was he more of a man when at the most vulnerable time of his life, he got down and washed his disciples' feet?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Was he more of a man then? What's the answer? The answer is both.
You're right.
It's how do we live life in a way that meets the need of the moment, and we don't take on, like you described, a sense of our own persona of responding out of life. This is out of a system, but more out of a lifestyle. And so how we try to help guys, Kevin, is that we create environments to help men have permission to be real. And how we have permission to be real, the starting point for us is that recognizing that I am broken, that apart from what Jesus has done for me, and he absolutely, in spite of all the crud in my own life, he loves me and he's met me and he has given me the freedom that I'm going to be with him forever, not because of what I've done, because of what he's done. And I know this is getting into much of the audience, those listening here don't share that faith. And I'm not necessarily apologize, but at least to give the answer that I'm wanting to say here. The starting point for us is to recognize that there is a brokenness in us, but there's also an incredible authority of what God's called me to give up my life to my wife, to my kids, to my grandkids, to others in a way that causes me to be willing to surrender my own stuff for the sake of others.
Hey guys, thanks for listening to this episode. I hope you're enjoying it and learning a lot. If you're looking for extra help, don't forget that I do offer one-on-one coaching. We can talk through a ton of different issues. I can give you guides, guidelines, and logistical help to help you take that next step or go to that next level in some of the things that you're dealing with in your life. We also have some course content, some guides, and a lot of educational materials over at maxedoutman.com. For the coaching, go ahead and go to maxedoutman.com/coaching, and you can learn about that. And then just go to maxedoutman.com for everything else. Thanks for joining us. Now back to the episode.
Because he did that for me, and out of gratefulness, I'm to live that kind of life. And so the understanding both the brokenness and the beauty of who I am is a great combination because that's who Jesus is. And so trying to live life, helping guys have that common sense together of which understands both. You're not ashamed of your brokenness, nor are you not wanting to grasp and hold the sacrificial courage that's needed to be a man today. Both exist around an environment where guys are opening up and aren't ashamed to talk about the hard stuff in their life, but at the same time are willing to help bring the best out of one another. It was Henry Ford that said, my best friend is the one who brings the best out of me. Right. And so that friendship that you described, that of the Navy SEALs, in the middle facing of a life and death situation, not pausing to go, hey, how's your day? How you feeling? Right. That's not that. Well, it's for men, how we're most of the men that I know that what brings that sense of connection and deep friendship is not around common emotions. It's around common horizons. Mm-hmm. It's we're made, and so it's seeing things that we can do together. You see that, right? So the great, connections, the things we love to read, the things we've experienced as men has been around that sense of that great task. So that's the military, sports, the marketplace, creating the ability to come together, collaborate, work together for some great opportunity before us. What brings me alive as a man is when I'm with others who have the same sense of a direction and willing to work together to make that work. Out of that comes a deep connection and a friendship. And so we want to build environments where it's not about, quote unquote, the emotion, although deep emotion along the way can be expressed, but it's around a sense of how can I help you be a better version, Kevin, of yourself, which means for me, I want to hear more of your story, not your bio, not your portfolio, but I want to know your story. If we take the time to hear, if I took the time to, if you and I get together, or we spend more time together, it's not about the high points. It's what are the connecting points in life that reveal, in the crucible of failing, how we overcame in a way that made us a better person. What are those thematic things, or how can we help when we are giving up on ourselves, that we can be there to believe in someone even when they stop believing in themselves. That's the kind of opportunities we want to build. And so, we're doing that. And then, it's gone beyond that of what core gets into another thing that we're kind of focused on now, that we've brought together 10 of the leading men's organizations in the country. And so we're just spending lots of time and energy together, is that, humanly speaking, we're losing the war. And so the issues of the masculinity, the language, and what's being done is being taken over. So we've lost the platform of defining masculinity on a way that's life-giving. And so again, it can get into the two extremes that want to define that kind of masculinity. So we recognize there are some things that we could do together that maybe we cannot do alone. And so we've begun that, this last 6-7 months, a lot of intensive communication about, it's not about my organization or my lane, but how collectively can we honor one another and work together in a way that could have impact in the country.
Yeah, I mean, we're in such a weird time with, gender discussion and masculinity. I read this story this morning that a man who has now decided he's a woman broke the women's world record for powerlifting by over 450 pounds. Like the record for women was 450 pounds less than what this guy, really as a guy, ended up setting. And it's just such a weird time like that. I actually saw this, somebody had done this skit that showed, it was a triathlete and they're asking him, well, how do you see the other competitors? And it's a guy that was competing in women's triathlon. And he said, well, I don't know. I never saw any of them. I was literally 2 miles ahead. And so it's just a weird time to be, a man or a woman. And I think in this context, it's just a bizarre time, but.
It is unbelievable. That whole thing you just described, I didn't understand it a lot. my daughter was big time into Harry Potter. And so and all that, and we were recently having a conversation around some things that were going on, and so the whole Rawlings, who wrote that. There's a I think it was a phenomenal podcast series. It's a 7-part podcast series. That's was it the Witch Trials of what's her initials? J.K. Rowling.
J.K. Rowling.
J.K. Rowling. And it gets, Kevin, it gets into what happened, why the such violent response, and why the left has bought into this need to define sexuality based upon preference versus fact. And it's pretty incredible. I just opened my eyes to what you just talked about. It is. Yeah, that it's just a symptom of a ongoing sickness that the results are significant that's taking place on our children today.
Yeah, and I think one of the things. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. A friend was here. Our air conditioning had a problem, so a friend came over and we were looking at a couple things. We were just chatting, and he told me just how that week his 7-year-old said, Mom and Dad, like, you know that girls can become boys and boys can become girls, right? And this is a 7-year-old. This is Texas, right? So that conversation is like, what? And it is very, very real. Yeah. And if we don't have a strong sense of a definition around masculinity, that neither is, that again doesn't. It's not a zero-sum game. That we got to do our part. We got to stand for our stuff, regardless of what others are. There's got to be a sense of both a compassion, a love, and a willingness also to take a stand.
Yeah, I have this great compassion for young men, especially because we live in a time when either it's not okay to be a masculine young man, or they don't really understand like what's okay and what's not okay, what the definition means. I had a conversation with my youngest, and we kind of work through this, but like her perception of organized sports, male organized sports, is they're a bunch of misogynists and rapists. I'm like, what? That makes no sense whatsoever, because and I was talking about, it came up because I was talking about the camaraderie and the bonding and how it teaches young men to be men. And that was that's kind of a prevalent ideal. And to have that placed upon a 15, 16, 17-year-old boy / young man is just something that, like, I don't know how our society moves through that and dads of those age guys are having a hard time, I think, understanding what's okay to teach your son. Like, what does it look like?
Yeah. You nailed it. It gets into a longer story, but my second son got into some serious drugs and self-medicating that almost took his life out on multiple occasions. It was a long haul. But without getting into all the details, much of what he went through during that time as an adolescent, when he was really, really struggling and needed me and I wanted to help him, my go-to was to tell him what he needed to do. What he really needed to hear was, because he had a father that was at that time well known. He had a son, his older brother, MVP, married the prettiest girl and all, very successful. But he felt like deep down that he was the black sheep, that he couldn't measure up. And what he needed from me is not to tell him what he needed to do, which I was really good at, right? And I loved him and I was trying, but in me, there was an inability for me to embrace understanding that he also needed to see weakness. He needed to see the part of me that did struggle and didn't have all the answers and was always trying to fill the gaps in doing my best versus, an honest self-disclosure that I was afraid to face myself. So I couldn't relate to Christian. That's his name. So Christian needed also an ability to see a part of me that I was unable to give him at that season of life. Now the whole thing is turned around because eventually I saw, in my own brokenness, we could have a relationship of our masculinity that just wasn't one-sided, as you said, the facade, but it was a realness around a brokenness and a weakness, but yet in my world, a graciousness where God, that's the best times when in my worst moments, he can become my greatest strength and ability. He loves the opportunity for me to help me do what I cannot do for myself if I'll just pause and be real with him and be real with others and to be real with Christian. So a lot of the dads out there, the best things we can do, the most powerful 3 words in the English language is I love you. The most powerful 4 words are I believe in you. The most powerful 5 words is I am here for you. And that I love you, I believe in you, and even when you don't believe in yourself, but I'm here for you, and I'm here for you to help Christian around an open and an honesty that he became no longer afraid to share what he was really going through, what he really thought about himself, which is very dark, and which led to the self-medicating that, again, almost killed him multiple times. But we as men can no longer afraid to help and embrace one another, both out of strength and out of weakness. It's powerful, Kevin. When you have those kind of environments that are willing to face weakness, but in a way that we can call the best out of one another, that is masculinity at its absolute best. And so, yeah, that's, again, I'm pontificating, I know, and I'm forgetting.
No, that's that. I mean, I love that story. I think that it's something that as a dad, I'm a dad of 2 girls. So I actually didn't raise sons. But I have young men in my life and I've had young men in my life. And obviously at one time I was one, but it's that with my own girls, I tried to show that I screw up all the time. Like the number of times I've apologized to my kids over the years for either flying off the handle, being too harsh, being impatient, all of those things. And I think it's okay for dads, and if we're talking about sons in this case, but for dads to tell their sons, look, this is a weird time for us, for you to be growing into a young man. I don't really know how to parent. I'm having a hard time understanding how to help you become a man because I grew up in a time that was much different than what you're growing up in. So we kind of need to go hand in hand and figure out this stuff together. That and walk along that path of, like you said, kind of getting into your weakness, but then also understanding who your son is at the core, who you are at your core, and to be able to walk down that path together. Hey guys, thanks for listening to this episode. I hope you're enjoying it and learning a lot. If you're looking for extra help, don't forget that I do offer one-on-one coaching. We can talk through a ton of different issues. I can give you guides, guidelines, and logistical help to help you take that next step or go to that next level in some of the things that you're dealing with in your life. We also have some course content, some guides, and a lot of educational materials over at maxedoutman.com. For the coaching, go ahead and go to maxedoutman.com/coaching. And you can learn about that. And then just go to maxedoutman.com for everything else. Thanks for joining us. Now back to the episode.
Yeah, absolutely. It's we need to remind ourselves when we hear the BS around, as you talk about the toxic masculinity. What was that statement you have behind you?
It says masculinity is not toxic. Some men just suck.
that is that. I love that. Is that that understanding around the willingness to embrace who we really are, that answers much of that struggle. Men need to be reminded. I lived just a few miles from there was a shooting in Colorado, in Aurora, Colorado, in a theater where a guy goes in and just killed a bunch of people. Well, they found afterwards that multiple men died, took the bullet. Underneath them was their girlfriend or their wife or their daughter. A bunch, right? So it's there's no time to think. All of a sudden you're watching a movie. Next thing you're hearing pop, 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 and you're realizing people are dying. The immediate instinct of many men in there was to cover
Right.
the woman next to them, right? That's in us. There's something very beautiful and wonderful about that. We got to remind ourselves that the stories of mass shootings that you hear, the one in Vegas, many of them have that same story of men dying, putting their bodies between the assailant and a woman or a girl. And so those are glimpses of the beauty of who we are as men, right? The willingness that we love life enough to willing to die. That's incredible. That's powerful. And so to remind our sons, number one, to counter the lie, that's masculinity is absolute best and is shown throughout time, different cultures, and that is a strength that is in a world that we need more and more of. And this is who you are. This is who you are. But at the same time now that we recognize there are things in our life that are broken. There are things in our life that will help us be the better version of ourselves if we're willing to face them and be with other guys that we're helping them and they're helping us in those areas where we are weak. And so we're not afraid to run away from those things that sabotage. And so, like you said, we can wonderfully win here, here, and here, but our family sees the anger side of us, right? And so there's something underneath us that is broken that needs an opportunity to be faced and to be understood in a way that can create change in us for the sake of others. And so, yeah, that's it's a kind of masculinity to once we're clear. And so what you're doing, Kevin, is so important that you're wanting to help men through your influence and have others on there define a masculinity that is powerful, that is real, that lasts. Once we get that, then we can build from that. What we're trying to do in these leaders that have come together, it's not something publicly, it's going a while, but the first thing that we're going after is defining masculinity in a way that's very, very powerful, that describes masculinity around our identity, our purpose, and our community, a need for one another in a way that recognizes the lies that we bought into, the truth we need to hold on to, and how it's to be lived out. And that's, so it's those kind of things, and that what you're doing, what we're trying to do to help a whole new generation of men in the midst of the worst time in this country's history live out a kind of masculinity that is desperately needed in the times that we live in today, like none other.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. And I'm super excited to see that come to fruition and see what you've got going there. I mean, I think for whatever reason, I think masculinity at its core is a servant-based masculinity. Whether that is, I've spent the last 28 years of my life, and I've talked about this on the podcast before, trying to open the door for my wife and the car door 98% of the time. Unless there's a physical reason I can't get to the door, she will wait for me to come open the door. Not in a like princessy way, but like that's just what we do. So that's a way to serve people. Serve my wife. I open the door for men and women going into the store. And I know this is a weird, controversial thing. You've had women that I don't need a man to open my door. Well, of course you don't. You have two arms and two legs. And you walked there. However, this is me serving you. And there's a sense of masculinity around that to where I'm serving. And I love that you and I are both Christians. A lot of people are listening are not. However, there's some real, even if you're not someone that embraces the whole idea of Christianity and the truth of the Bible and what Jesus did and all that thing. So like, take the faith and belief side out of it for a second. If you look at Jesus as a man, and I've been watching The Chosen. I don't know if you've watched that show at all, but it's obviously it's a fictionalized and dramatized version, but I love the way that they depict Jesus because he's funny, he's sarcastic, he's irritated with his disciples. But at the same time, he has a real softness. He can connect to women on a very masculine level, but in a more, to meet their own femininity. What a lot of people don't realize, especially if you've kind of grown up around the artwork that depicts Jesus did not look like a 110-pound female. Jesus was a carpenter. Back in the day, they didn't have DeWalt power tools. They were using axes and huge knives, and they're dealing with timber. And like Jesus would have been a fit guy. He had spent probably from Joseph had taught him how to be an apprentice. He had spent at least 25 years, probably 25 years working with his hands and being a carpenter. So
Absolutely.
he was as someone that you would describe as like the man's man, like,
Yeah.
but at the same time, he did the ultimate servant masculinity, which is like, give your life up, not only for those around you, but all of humanity. That's the story.
Yeah.
That's the story of the Bible.
Yeah. That's dead on. I think, we as the church have failed in so many ways, the world, the community, because the artwork that you described came out of likely an emphasis around spirituality that's based upon more of a religious perspective versus being real, being one of the biggest enemies to the Jesus that you and I would hope that others would come to know. It's us, because what we're saying is that you need to be holy to measure up. You need to perform, you need to do this. That was the enemies that Jesus in his time that he faced. The biggest enemy to Jesus wasn't the Romans, who were the greatest world power at that time, that were suffocating the life out of Israel. That wasn't the number one enemy. The number one enemy was religion that sought to base its need to control people through, you're the expert and the others, you need to measure up based upon these laws and principles that ultimately you're never going to be able to live up to.
Right.
And so the chosen, what they've sought to do is to bring a reality to who Jesus is in a way that's counter to centuries of what I'm saying is that's way overstated. There are so many beautiful, wonderful people who've reflected the reality of Jesus throughout time forever. But I'm just saying, as a general principle of religion, it's really failed that really is, impacts again into what we're talking about, and that's identity. That's around what you're attracted to, is saying, hey, this is a version, an imagined version of Jesus that draws from a number of truths and principles from there, but in a way that's very real.
Right.
Well, that's life, right? Some of your best moments, the guys, and maybe some women are listening to, some of your best moments, some of my best moments of life has been when I've had a chance to just be real. And I've just not had to I could be myself, both in the things that are going on in my life in a way that I feel believed in, regardless of how bad or how wonderful they might be. That there's a reality where that kind of environment, that we can face the reality that ultimately can be met by a God who that's what he wants. He just wants us to be real. Doesn't want, quit faking it. But yeah, that's what you're saying is dead on. Regardless out there of those of you that, may have zero religious background and all, I think there's hope for you around an ability, again, of finding in environments where those who are not just acquaintances, those who aren't quote unquote even just friends, but do you have somebody that you can be absolutely real with in a way that can bring the best out of you without feeling that you're being judged? That's wonderful. And could you do that for that guy? When you have that kind of commitment, you can work it out, because we weren't meant to do this alone. I think ultimately we can't get done the things that we would hope around masculinity, struggle, culture, children, all the stuff we've talked about. Ultimately, to work that out, it's got to be done, I believe, in community, where we can have that same common desire to want to help one another to live that kind of life.
Yeah. And I mean, I think for most men, myself included, I go to church, so I'm with men every weekend. However, I don't have a lot of close friends locally. Most of my friends, just because of the nature of my job and what we do, and my companies and all of that. Most of my friends are located all over the world. So like a lot of my interactions are like this. They're video calls or FaceTime or text or whatever. What kind of advice do you give men on trying to find those connections? Like where do we go to seek out those kind of things? Because as a guy, it's, we don't have like a friend dating app to let's, I like cars. I like this. I'm a hunter. I like these. I like golf, and then you can like match up, swipe left or swipe right for your male friends. Like what kind of guidance are you giving men to kind of find that connection?
That's a great question. I also like to ask you that. I think I'd love to hear your answer to this question. For me, I guess it's been in the experience where I have an opportunity with a guy to get beyond, again, the portfolio, the fun stuff. Like we everything doesn't have to be serious, and it can't be serious, right? So I love guys that we can have fun, be real with. I'll call those acquaintances. And then there's friends who know a deeper level of who I am, and so that's But the kind of thing that we're talking about here, what I would differentiate between brothers, like acquaintances, when you die, may show up to your funeral. Friends, for sure, all of them are going to come to your funeral. Some of them will speak at it. But brothers, and I'm using that as a deeper level of what you're asking, are those who will carry you out. And that's not the first time they did that, right? There was a genuine experience around some time in life where you needed them, and as well as you did for them, in a way that helped them make it, when apart from your being there and willing to go the extra mile for them, they wouldn't have, or you wouldn't have made it, right? That's what I would differentiate. How I found that is that those who I thought could be that, is that when I open up and when I deal with things, that I find out they have an inability to return that. And so they're wonderful, they're gracious and all. And I can give examples of it, of just at a really dark time in my life where I really needed that level of connection. I was around some guys. I was living in California at the time, and it was a group of wonderful guys, but they had an inability to be vulnerable, right? And so
is it inability or is it unwillingness?
I think it's both.
Yeah.
I think I'm giving them. They're good guys, really, really good guys, and I'm seeing them. I'm picturing them, and so I use transparency and vulnerability different. Transparency is just being open and honest. Hopefully I've been transparent here, but I've not been vulnerable. But I've not been. There's certain vulnerabilities. If I told you some things that were going on with me and my struggles that would be improper, maybe to bring up here. Because it gives opportunity to be misunderstood and be judged, right? But that's a gift that we give one another. So back, what I look for and I found is guys who are willing to go there, and vulnerability isn't just about the crap in our lives. It's also about the hopes and the dreams of our life, right? It's just not one-sided. It's not just, catharsis of a dump around, the deep, dark stuff, right? And by the way, on that, we don't have to be graphic. The Bible's never, there's not a need to be graphic. It just needs to be open, right? And so I don't have to go into all the, details, but just an openness around issues and things that I may be going through out of fears. This season of my life, am I going to, I lost everything, so I don't have a lot of savings and all. At some point, or am I going to face the consequences of losing everything because of a financial situation I'm currently in that I can't provide for my wife, right? So that's an honest. I was just vulnerable there for a moment.
Yeah.
And so having someone where I can be open and to connect with, at times I'm not just struggling that alone. But again, I think I have the original design, having an environment where I can deal with those kind of things with others in a way that the shame of what I don't want to face those myself. Like that's a hard one for me. But that I can find then a freedom in a way to recognize that ultimately, do I really believe I'm serving a God who's greater than my own bullcrap? Yes. And so I need to be reminded of that at times. And so bottom line, who can you sense that is willing to reciprocate in a level of relationship that's about bringing the best out of one another for the sake of others, that's a brother. When you're in environments where they love hearing and they're open, but they're not willing to go there, that's a friendship. But that's, you don't want to invest deeply there. You want to find those few, and so I'm assuming, have found a few that you can be that right now aren't currently with you in proximity, but are with you, can be with you, that you can start off right wherever, however long you've gone, you can start off at that point. I'm assuming, is that your experience?
Yeah.
That you can actually go there. And it's a part of the conversation because your friend wants to hear it. Your brother wants to hear it. Hey, how's it going? And they're not enamored with your successes. They love it. They want to encourage that, but they're also willing to, they understand maybe some things that are going on that are needing to help connect the dots in your journey along the way. Anyway, that's my 2 cents. What's your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, and we live in an environment now where, we can actually develop and foster relationships. I'm in a unique situation because I'm in small town Montana. I'm not a hunter. That's like 95% of the hobbies here. I'm a car guy. There's no car culture here where I live. If I built a hot rod. I have a 65 Cobra replica that I built. If I want to have a car show, or if I want to go to a car show, I basically have to put that in my shop and sit in front of it with a lawn chair. And so finding that, if you're trying to find that hobby based connection, it's a very difficult thing for me to do here locally. And so that's something I've struggled with you for years, but I kind of wrap my head around the fact that, two of my best friends, one lives in Lake Tahoe, one lives in Huntington Beach, Southern California, Seal Beach, actually, Southern California. And so I've wrapped my mind around the fact that I can have these deep connective, conversations and relationship with those people, even though I only see them a couple times a year, for example. And so that's something that I've kind of had to wrap my mind around and realize that we have the technology. And granted, to be able to see you on video does help. There's a little bit of body language kind of stuff. I can't punch you in the arm when I tell you a joke or give you a hard time or whatever. But there is a very real conversation that you can have and a connection. I think, for my friends, for example, I've really been over the last couple of years making sure, and this is something super simple, to tell them that I love these guys. Hey man, I love you. I wish one of my best friends a happy birthday yesterday. And I told a joke, basically saying, he's much younger. He's like 15 years younger than I am. So I'm like, I stopped aging, so eventually you'll just catch up to me, was the joke. But then I said, hey man, I love you, and I'm very thankful for your friendship. And that was the end. That was just a simple text, but we have that connection. And I do the same thing with my other close friends.
Yeah.
But I also can have real conversations with him to say, hey, last time you mentioned that you and your wife were dealing with XYZ. How's that going? What steps have you taken to do your part to do that? Because I think, and I'll give you a second to respond, but one of the great things about male friendships is you may say to me, hey, one of my concerns is retirement and the consequences of some of this financial stuff that I went through. But the great thing about having these deeper conversations is that I may have some actual logistic strategies on some level to kind of help feed into your life, to not only support you in that, but also to maybe offer some long-term advice on, hey, this may be a little path that might help with those fears and the logistics of the situation.
Yeah, I love it. I no need to comment on that. I love what you said, and so it's finding those kind of guys that you're saying from the heart. Hey man, I just want to let you know I love you and I really appreciate our friendship. You know what that does for us, right? That there's something when you would say that, if you said that to me and we hung up, I go, man, that is awesome, right? We need that.
Yeah.
And so I think, I just think that's awesome. and
And it's
and the willingness to be there to make a difference, right?
yeah,
What you're saying is we don't have a lot of energy, right? You don't have a lot of energy to do what you just said to a lot of different people. That's impossible, right?
right.
Because you're talking about a willingness to go deep and at times sacrifice time and energy and influence and even finances for the sake of someone. Those are gifts, and and so and so it's just, again, I'm going to go back, to a Bible thing, but was Jesus wrong when in his time of weakness in the garden, when he was about to face death, that he asked and needed Peter, James, and John to be near him? Was that a
Hmm.
sign of weakness that he said, I want you to be near me to pray with me? Uh, was that weakness? No, it was beautiful. It was wonderful. And if God, that we would believe God himself in the flesh had that kind of vulnerability to say, I need brothers to be with me at a time when it is going to be uh, the greatest challenges that I've ever faced, that have never been faced again in our world, in the
Hmm.
history of the world, right? And so it's wonderful to have that and to need that and to recognize the place for that. And there's a lot of guys that you're listening to this and going, I don't have that. Well, it's that first step you just described it is looking for those common denominators that we share as a building point for a much deeper connection.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, when you're talking about that, I start to tear up a little bit, like, because it really does mean, like, it touches me deeply to have those relationships. And it's funny that you brought up the funeral thing, because I've told my kids and I've told my friends, I'm like, so many people do these eulogy things where they stand up and they basically create a saint. Last week they were talking badly about you, and for whatever reason, now that you're dead, you're like the best guy that ever lived. And I want friends that will stand up at my funeral and say, he was kind of a dick sometimes,
Yeah,
but this is who he was in my life, right?
yeah.
Like those are my quote unquote relationship goals for those kind of friends. And
What happens in the room? What happens in that chapel? No, seriously, what happens in the room?
yeah, I mean, people are laughing and just like
They're
this.
going, but this guy's being real.
Yeah.
And if he's up there honoring Kevin that way, then I love Kevin even more because
Right.
he has
Yeah.
those kind of friends that are being real and not just the facade stuff. You're dead on. And it's the same thing that happens for when someone shares with us a genuine vulnerable area, we think that they're going to think less of us.
Hmm.
But the kind of guys we're looking for to do life with, it's the opposite, and we love it when they're that with us because we think more of them because it's being real.
Hmm. 100%. Well, I think that's an awesome way to kind of land the plane. I will make a recommendation for those that are listening. If you're a Christian or if you're not Christian, seek out The Chosen. This is a biblically based fictional account, but I think if we're talking about masculinity and who men can be, and if you want to, even if you only believe that Jesus was a historical figure or a made up figure, I think there's some lessons in that
Yeah,
to see who Jesus was as a man, as kind of a model for us. So I would suggest that for anybody, take away from it what's revealed to you. But how do we find more information about what you've got going on, and how do we find you and learn more and kind of take those steps?
yeah. Well, we have a website. It's CoreUnites.com. On there, there's some resources. We've done some films, done really, really well. I don't know if you have a chance to see them, but they vary from famous people like Mariano Rivera or the Navy SEAL kind of guys, but to average guys, a tattoo artist in the Northwest, to struggling issues. But we use the power of story that is watched. It's about 10 minutes long, but then our question is, what part of that story connected with you? When we begin to talk about it, we found it's a great way to give us permission to talk about the more important things in life in a way that kind of enhances the relational connection. So that's what core, a rough thing around there. What we're working on with these leaders in the country, we're still under the radar. And so there's some things that in the months ahead, and maybe we can circle back, or I got some great guys that will be some great candidates for you in the show here. Phenomenal guys that, could fill in and, add a lot. More.
It'd be fun to maybe do a little roundtable thing. We could have three or four of you guys on here to at least kind of talk about that. I thought that would be actually really interesting and fun. So
yeah. And these guys, they all love. It so happens that they're cigar and whiskey guys, right? So there's a common denominator. I don't know, not everybody. That's not necessarily my thing, but everybody else thing. But yeah, their point is they're just real guys, and but with profound insight. Yeah, let's circle back.
Awesome. Well, I thank you so much, RT, for coming. I thought this was super interesting, and I think we'll probably need a part 2 or 3 at some point too.
Hey, bless you in what you're doing. Thank you so much,
buddy.
If you're looking to really maximize your life and become the man you were made to be, head over to maxedoutman.com and get your journey started today.